Beneath the sugary pop and psychedelic soundtracks of the 1960s, music legends like John Lennon, the Zombies, and Motown's brightest stars were slipping taboo messages past the world's watchful eyes and censors. The scandals behind hits like Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds went far beyond wild rumors, sparking media frenzies, lyrical witch hunts, and secret corporate battles no one dared admit. If you think you know the real story behind your favorite classics, think again. These are the 10 secrets they tried to bury about 60s classic songs, and discovering them might just rewrite everything you thought you knew about the music of a generation. But how did innocent tunes become a battleground for deception and rebellion? Released in 1967 on the Beatles' landmark album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds quickly became ground zero for one of the decade's most persistent rumors. The song's initials, LSD, were impossible to ignore at the height of psychedelic culture. Headlines speculated the band had finally dropped all pretense and written a love letter to acid. Newspapers quoted parents and politicians warning that the Beatles were pushing drugs on an entire generation. For months, John Lennon faced a barrage of reporters hungry for a confession. His answer never wavered. The song was inspired by a drawing his son Julian brought home from nursery school, a picture of a classmate named Lucy floating in a starry sky. Lennon repeated the story so often that even he seemed amused by its stubborn innocence, once telling an interviewer, "I swear to God, or swear to Mao, or to anybody you like, I had no idea about the initials." But the rumors refused to die. Critics pointed to the song's kaleidoscopic lyrics, tangerine trees and marmalade skies, and the swirling, dreamlike arrangement as proof of a hidden agenda. The BBC banned the track from radio, citing suspected drug references. Lennon's sly humor only added fuel. When asked if the song was about LSD, he'd grin and shrug, never quite closing the door on the possibility. Paul McCartney, years later, admitted the band's songwriting was influenced by the psychedelic scene, but insisted the song's origin was exactly as Lennon described. The truth: no coded message, just a child's imagination and a press corps determined to find scandal where none existed. What made the Lucy saga different from earlier controversies was the way rumor itself became part of the song's legacy. Fans, journalists, and even censors projected their own anxieties onto the Beatles, convinced that every line hid a subversive meaning. Lennon's playful ambiguity turned plausible deniability into an art form, a trick that would be copied by artists for decades. The result? A song forever caught between myth and memory. Its reputation shaped as much by what people believed as by what actually happened. In the world of 60s classics, sometimes the most enduring secrets are the ones we invent ourselves. When the Zombies recorded Time of the Season in 1967, they were a band on the verge of fading out. Their previous singles had missed the charts, and the group was quietly breaking up before the song even hit American radio. But in 1969, something unexpected happened. Time of the Season started climbing the Billboard Hot 100, its breathy call and response and swirling organ lines suddenly everywhere. The real surprise wasn't just its sound, it was the way the lyrics slipped past the era's censors with a wink and a nod. Rod Argent's writing didn't rely on psychedelic word salad or overt rebellion. Instead, he used a kind of coded sensuality. Phrases like, "What's your name? Who's your daddy? Is he rich like me?" And especially, "Let me try with pleasured hand," carried a charge that listeners couldn't miss. The line was suggestive enough to make parents uneasy, but just ambiguous enough to keep programmers guessing. There's no record of official bans or memos targeting the track, but behind the scenes, it sparked nervous conversations. Some stations reportedly hesitated, worried about complaints, but the song's clever construction gave them cover. It wasn't explicit, it was just suggestive. The Zombies understood the rules of the game. In an era when the Rolling Stones had to re-record "Let's Spend the Night Together" as Let's Spend Some Time Together for American TV, and the Doors were blacklisted for refusing to change a single lyric, the Zombies chose subtlety. They crafted a hit that could mean whatever the listener wanted it to mean. To a teenager, it sounded like freedom. To a DJ, it sounded just safe enough to play. That balancing act, writing lyrics that could slip through the filter while still hinting at something forbidden, became one of the band's greatest strengths. By the time Time of the Season reached its peak, the band had already split. They never toured behind their biggest hit, but the song's legacy is a masterclass in coded desire, a lesson in how to bypass the gatekeepers without ever getting caught. When radio programmers debated whether to risk a complaint, the Zombies' sly wordplay had already won. The secret wasn't in what they said, but in how they said it. On the surface, White Rabbit sounds like a fever dream set to music. Released at the height of the 1967 Summer of Love, it became Jefferson Airplane's most recognizable anthem. But the real genius lay in how Grace Slick hid her message in plain sight. She borrowed the world of Alice in Wonderland, Mad Hatters, hookah-smoking caterpillars, and potions that make you grow or shrink, and spun them into a psychedelic riddle. The references were direct enough for anyone tuned in to the counterculture, yet innocent enough to slip past most radio censors. Grace Slick later admitted she wrote the song after an acid trip, but she also understood the power of plausible deniability. In interviews, she pointed out that Lewis Carroll's books had been required reading for generations. If censors wanted to ban her lyrics, they'd have to ban Alice too. The arrangement did its own work, building from a quiet, Spanish-tinged guitar line to a thundering crescendo that mirrored the rush of a mind-altering experience. Every measure added tension, each repetition of "Feed Your Head" daring listeners to question what the song was really about. By the time White Rabbit reached the top 10, the trick had paid off. Radio programmers played it, critics praised its artistry, and teenagers recognized the code instantly. Slick's strategy was simple: use the familiar as a shield, let the music do the talking, and trust that anyone who needed to understand the message would. The result was a song that didn't just survive the censors, it outsmarted them, turning a children's fantasy into a call for rebellion that echoed far beyond the Haight-Ashbury. For a brief moment, literature became a mask, and every radio in America broadcast a secret. On September 17, 1967, the Doors stepped onto the Ed Sullivan Show stage with a promise hanging over them. Network producers had made one demand: change the lyric, "Girl, we couldn't get much higher." For Ed Sullivan's team, that single word, higher, was a red flag, an open invitation to controversy in front of millions of American households. Jim Morrison agreed to the change during rehearsal, but when the cameras rolled live, he leaned into the microphone and sang the original line without a hint of hesitation. The moment was electric. Sullivan's producers were furious. Backstage, Morrison and the band were told they'd never appear on the show again. The ban was immediate and permanent. The fallout didn't end with a single performance. Booking agents and network executives took notice. Other television opportunities dried up almost overnight. But for the Doors, the risk paid off in ways no one expected. The story hit newspapers across the country. Teenagers who already saw Morrison as an outlaw now saw him as a hero. Record sales spiked, and "Light My Fire" became an anthem for rebellion. The Ed Sullivan standoff cemented the band's reputation as untouchable, too wild to be controlled, too honest to be censored. Internal call sheets and rehearsal notes from that day show how close the band came to caving. Morrison's refusal wasn't just a stunt. It was a calculated act of defiance at a time when performers were expected to fall in line. The cost was real. The reward was immortality. For every door that closed, a legend grew larger. In the world of 60s classic songs, sometimes the secret isn't what's hidden in the lyrics, but what happens when an artist refuses to hide at all. In 1968, Motown executives faced a dilemma that threatened their carefully crafted image of clean-cut success. The Supremes, led by Diana Ross, were set to release Love Child, a song that didn't just hint at taboo, it named it. The lyrics told the story of a young woman born out of wedlock, a subject still considered radioactive for mainstream radio and television. Internal Motown memos from that summer reveal an anxious debate, how to push the single without risking a backlash that could jeopardize their biggest act. TV booking notes show negotiations with network censors who flagged lines like "scorned by society" and "born in poverty." Berry Gordy, Motown's founder, personally oversaw a marketing plan that included sanitized press releases and alternate lyric sheets for television performances. The label's PR team worked overtime, pitching the song as a message of hope and resilience rather than scandal. Some radio stations hesitated at first, but with the label's assurances and a few strategic edits, Love Child made it onto playlists nationwide. Behind the scenes, Motown's legal team tracked every complaint and quietly adjusted their strategy, determined to avoid the fate of artists whose careers had been derailed by controversy. Diana Ross and the Supremes performed the song on variety shows with subtle changes, never acknowledging the original lyrics' full weight. The gamble paid off. Love Child shot to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. But the success came at a cost. Motown's willingness to negotiate, compromise, and sometimes conceal the song's intent revealed a different kind of rebellion, one rooted not in open defiance, but in survival. For the label, secrecy wasn't about hiding revolution. It was about protecting their stars and their bottom line in an industry that punished even the suggestion of controversy. In November 1969, Creedence Clearwater Revival rolled into Fort Bragg, North Carolina, for a scheduled show. Fortunate Son had just been released, and the song's raw anger over Vietnam and the draft was still echoing across the country. John Fogerty didn't hold back on stage. He sang about silver spoon privilege and the brutal reality facing working-class draftees, with military brass and enlisted men in the crowd. That night, Army officials confronted the band backstage, demanding they tone down the message or risk losing their contract. Fogerty refused. The confrontation was tense, with military police standing by as tempers flared. Within days, the Army canceled future bookings, and word spread through the industry. Radio programmers, especially those with ties to military bases, started pulling Fortunate Son from their playlists. The official reason was always vague, too political, too divisive, not the right mood for the times. But the pattern was clear. Artists who challenged the system paid a price. For Fogerty and his bandmates, the cost wasn't just lost gigs. It was a warning shot to every songwriter who dared to question authority. The message from the top, dissent would be punished, even if it came wrapped in 3 chords and a chorus the whole country could sing. Phil Ochs spent the late 1960s writing songs that cut straight to the heart of America's war in Vietnam. His voice was clear, his message unmistakable: question authority, demand peace. But as the Tet Offensive exploded across headlines in early 1968, something strange started happening on the nation's airwaves. Protest anthems like "I Ain't Marching Anymore" didn't trigger public bans or angry letters from politicians. Instead, they simply disappeared from playlists. DJs who had once spun Ochs's records found them quietly dropped from rotation. There were no memos, no official statements, just a new silence. Some radio programmers would later admit, off the record, that they'd been told to play it safe. Stations worried about backlash from sponsors or from listeners who saw dissent as unpatriotic. The result was an invisible blacklist, not a law or a government order, but a series of private decisions that kept protest music out of earshot. FOIA requests and interviews with former DJs reveal a pattern. After the Tet Offensive, anti-war songs lost their place on the air, not because of public outrage, but because programmers quietly decided the risk was too high. For artists like Phil Ochs, the cost was measured in lost audiences and fading influence. The censors didn't need to ban his records. All they had to do was stop playing them. When the Kingsmen's version of Louie Louie hit the airwaves in late 1963, the backlash was immediate and bizarre. Parents and politicians called it filth. Radio stations banned it. Churches warned that a single listen could corrupt America's youth. But the real twist came when the FBI launched a full-scale investigation. Convinced the song's garbled vocals were hiding obscene messages. For over 2 years, federal agents listened to the same 3 chords on repeat, slowing the tape, transcribing every syllable, even consulting linguistics experts. The result? A 100-page file and no evidence of profanity. The lyrics were just a sailor's love letter, slurred by a cheap microphone and a rushed recording session. Meanwhile, the real obscenity was unfolding offstage. Richard Berry, the man who wrote Louie Louie in 1955, had sold the rights for $750, barely enough to pay for his wedding. As the song climbed the charts and royalties poured in, Berry lived in poverty, watching others profit from his creation. It wasn't until the late 1980s, after decades of legal battles and industry pressure, that Berry finally received a settlement and the rights were restored. By then, the damage was done. The FBI's panic had faded into farce. But the story of Louie Louie left a deeper scar. A songwriter shut out of his own success while a country obsessed over a secret that never existed. In 1967 alone, U.S. broadcasters circulated dozens of internal memos debating whether songs like Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and Time of the Season crossed the line. Throughout the decade, artists from John Lennon to Diana Ross navigated hidden pressures, from coded lyrics and strategic denials to direct confrontations with censors and military officials. Declassified FBI files on Louie Louie and documented blacklist tactics prove that official scrutiny reached absurd and sometimes devastating extremes. Yet many details, such as the full extent of silent radio bans, remain undisclosed. Today, historians agree that these secrets reshape the industry, influencing how music is marketed and interpreted. As long as records remain sealed and motives unspoken, some puzzles endure. What's clear is that behind every classic hit lies a story of resistance, negotiation, and the ongoing struggle over who controls what the world hears.